Something washed up on the shores of the Pacific and nobody was ready for what it was. The Tonga event didn't just shake the ground, it reached down into the deepest parts of the ocean and pulled things up that weren't supposed to be here. And I mean that literally. Scientists who have spent their entire careers studying the deep sea were standing on beaches looking at creatures they had only ever seen in pressurized lab containers, alive on the surface, and none of them had a clean explanation for how that was even biologically possible. Let me back up because this needs context. January 15, 2022. The Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai underwater volcano exploded. Not erupted, exploded. The kind of explosion that circled the entire Earth twice as a shockwave. People in Alaska heard it. Alaska. That's how loud this thing was, and Alaska isn't anywhere close to Tonga. NASA confirmed it was the most powerful atmospheric explosion recorded in over 100 years, roughly 500 times the force of the Hiroshima bomb. 500 times. Barometers in the United Kingdom spiked from it. Weather monitoring stations across the entire planet picked up the pressure wave, and most of those stations had never recorded anything like it in their history. And all of that happened because the entire explosion was about 150 meters below the ocean surface, which means every single bit of that force went straight through the water first, through every layer of it, from the ocean floor to the top. Now here's where it gets strange. And I want you to think about this with me because honestly this part doesn't get talked about enough. The deep ocean has layers. Pressure layers, thermal layers, zones that deep-sea creatures have adapted to over millions of years. These animals don't just live down there because they like it, they need that pressure to survive. Their bodies are literally built around it, every organ, every cell, every biological function calibrated for a world of crushing darkness. Some of them have never in their entire existence been anywhere near the surface. And then in a matter of hours after this eruption, they started showing up. What would you do if you saw something like that wash up on a beach? Drop it in the comments because I genuinely want to know. Fishermen near Tonga were the first to notice things in the water that weren't normal. Deep water fish species surfacing. Oarfish, which can grow over 10 meters long, appearing near the coastline. Now if you don't know about oarfish, these are animals that live so deep most humans will never encounter one in the wild their entire life. Japanese coastal communities have believed for centuries that oarfish rising to the surface signals an incoming disaster. Earthquakes, eruptions, tsunamis. And here's the thing that gets me, oarfish were reportedly spotted in the region before the eruption too. Before. Scientists don't officially validate the folklore, but they also haven't been able to fully explain the timing pattern either, and that silence alone says something real. That's the same creature appearing before and after the same catastrophic event. If this is already hitting different, hit the like button because we're just getting started and it only gets weirder from here. After the eruption, the reports kept coming in. Giant squid. Bioluminescent organisms glowing along coastlines at night. Deep-sea fish that have no business being anywhere near sunlight appearing in shallow water, some alive, some clearly disoriented, some already dead from the pressure change. There were species in those reports that researchers hadn't seen surface in living memory, not rare as in hard to find, rare as in they simply don't come up here. Marine biologists who arrived to document the aftermath described scenes they genuinely didn't have language for. One researcher said it felt like the ocean had been turned inside out. That's not a metaphor, that's a scientist trying to describe something their entire training hadn't prepared them to see. Here's what the research teams pieced together. When that explosion happened underwater at that scale, it didn't just create waves on the surface. It sent violent pressure pulses through every layer of water beneath it. Think about what that means for an animal living thousands of meters down in completely stable pressure. Suddenly the pressure around it shifts violently, thermal layers collapse, currents that have been consistent for potentially thousands of years get disrupted in minutes. The creatures didn't choose to come up. They got displaced. Some of them were essentially pushed upward by the force of the water movement, and by the time they reached shallower depths their bodies were already in distress because nothing in their biology had ever prepared them for low-pressure conditions. The speed of it is what really shocked the scientists. Some species appeared on the surface within hours of the eruption. Hours. Deep-sea biology doesn't work that fast under normal conditions. The fact that animals from that depth showed up near the surface that quickly told researchers something about the raw force of this event that their instruments hadn't fully captured on their own. NOAA flagged the biological aftermath as one of the most significant post-eruption marine disruptions ever documented. That's not nothing. And the oarfish kept appearing. Days after the eruption. Then weeks. Different locations scattered across the Pacific. Each sighting got logged, photographed, sent to research teams. Scientists noted that oarfish have sensory systems that can detect infrasound and pressure changes in ways we still don't fully understand. The old Japanese fishermen who passed down the folklore about these animals weren't making things up. They were observing a real pattern across generations, and in 2022 that pattern held again, whether science was ready to admit it or not. The eruption also did something that had essentially no modern precedent. It built a new island. The explosion was so massive that debris and volcanic material piled up and broke through the ocean surface. For weeks there was land where there had been no land before. Then it collapsed back underwater. Gone. A temporary island that appeared and disappeared like the Earth briefly decided to rearrange itself and then changed its mind. Scientists tracking the formation said nothing in recent recorded history matched what they were watching happen in real time. And underneath where that island briefly stood, the seafloor had been completely rearranged, and habitats stable for potentially centuries were simply gone. The bioluminescent sightings along the coastlines after dark were something that residents in the region weren't prepared for either. Sections of coastal water glowing blue and green at night, stretching along the shoreline in ways that felt completely surreal. The disruption had forced massive concentrations of deep organisms into shallower water, and some of those organisms produced their own light. So for weeks after this eruption, people were standing on beaches filming the ocean glowing in the dark on their phones. And that footage spread everywhere because it looked impossible, except it was just the ocean responding to what had happened to it. Scientists are still working through this. Research vessels were deployed to the region specifically to study the biological fallout, and what they found on the seafloor in the surrounding area was almost as alarming as what had surfaced. Entire sections showed evidence of massive sediment displacement. Creatures that hadn't been disturbed in potentially thousands of years were gone from zones they'd occupied for longer than any human record exists. Papers are still being published, monitoring data is still being analyzed, and the long-term consequences for species displaced from habitats they hadn't left in potentially millennia, that's a question nobody has a complete answer to yet. What I keep thinking about is how little we actually know about what lives down there. We know more about the surface of the moon than we know about our own ocean floor. And then an event like the Tonga eruption happens and the ocean reminds us that whatever is down there, it can reach the surface, it just needs the right push. Creatures that hadn't seen light in thousands of years washing up on beaches because one underwater explosion rewrote the rules for everyone. That's not dramatic framing. That's just what happened. And if you think the deep ocean has shown us everything it's hiding, you haven't been paying attention.